So, very welcome to the No Drama Dharma podcast of the Kienze Center for Contemplative Tradition at our University of Leipzig. I'm so happy and pleased to have you here with us, Dan Hirshberg. Few years, many years actually, maybe like 10 years ago, we crossed paths just for a short time and haven't really connected. So it's the first time we actually really talk. I think your path has progressed also quite a lot. When I first saw you and when I look what you did before, you were doing a lot of historical research. And now, with great excitement, I see you are incorporating sitting practice, incorporating actual meditation sessions into the curriculum of the universities. Currently, you're at the University of Boulder and at Naropa University, if I understand right.
My position is really at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I contribute at Naropa, but my position really isn't there.
Okay. Yeah, and that's like for us as the Center for Contemplative Traditions, there's so many different points where paths cross between contemplative practices, instructions on contemplative practices, manuals, texts that we read, and at the same time the environment that they come from, and now not only the environment that they come from, which might be a practicing environment, but also that the practice in certain aspects also comes out of these traditions again and serves people in different ways. We do have the ways of the Buddhist centers that are kind of autonomously functioning from our education system, but at the same time, our educational systems are opening towards mindfulness and compassion practices. And often these are entirely secular. But then what does secular mean?
Good question.
What does religion mean? Sometimes very narrow definitions and constraints that come with it. So I'm very happy to, yeah, just to ask you, what do you do? How does it work?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've pursued contemplative studies at a couple different institutions now. And a lot of this has to do with the nature of those institutions, what they're open to, and the opportunities that we have for teaching when we're there. So, formerly, when I was a professor at the University of Mary Washington, I already had a couple of colleagues in our department who had started a contemplative practice course where it was really geared towards teaching students how to meditate. So we had the opportunity there just to move forward and work within that program and eventually develop it into a contemplative studies program, which I directed and I really articulated as something that was meant to be, in many respects, skill-based, because that's what the students wanted. On the one hand, you can look at contemplative traditions, of course, as a topic of inquiry. You can approach it critically through academia or through other means. But what the students clearly were interested in, or moreover, what they really needed more than anything, what they were seeking, was help to deal with their stress, to deal with their anxiety, to deal with all of the distractions of our current environment, social media, constant attachment to our devices. And so they're really looking for practical help, not just content about what people in these traditions did some time ago, and even not so much about what they're doing today, although we certainly relied on some of those materials, but they really wanted to get into the practice. And so that's how that program developed there, is really around contemplative pedagogy and the evolution of these courses in which students were required to meditate every single day for 20 minutes. And so if we could get them into a 2-semester sequence of courses, it would be meditating, hopefully almost every day anyway, for almost a whole academic year. And now here at the University of Colorado Boulder, they're launching a contemplative studies certificate program, which is just being articulated, but has a lot of support from the dean and other leaders within our academic environment. And so with that, we're building that out, starting to create the courses that will contribute to it. And within that, I'm creating a course that I'll call Tibetan Contemplative Practices, which will be based on a similar model, very skill-based, informed by the traditions, their instructions, but looking at them in a way that students aren't asked to adopt those particular philosophical or religious views. So, with that, the one thing that I would also throw in there is that a lot of this opportunity, I think, has to do with the coalescence of modern liberal values, ethics, the way that we treat ourselves and others with acceptance, with compassionate concern. There's lots of people, not everybody, but lots of people who believe that these are good qualities to cultivate both individually and socially. And so, with that, there's opportunities to bring that into the curriculum and help students work on those qualities in a practical manner.
Yeah, that's really, really something. And so you are actually, when you explain meditation, when you teach it, when you help them applying meditation, then you at the same time also introduce traditional topics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, or you work purely with extracts, with like reformulations. How do you bring the subject matter to people?
That's a great question. I think that we can't teach these practices completely devoid of their cultural and traditional contexts. We'd be cutting them off from thousands of years of development. And so, with that, we use this kind of third person, not necessarily objective, but let's say a critically aware approach to traditional materials. And so, we'll look at classics of meditation literature, these types of manuals, but we are driving more towards the extraction of skills. And so, with that, it's really about instructions that teach students that they can directly apply to develop skill in concentration, relaxation, compassion for self and others, and then ultimately out of that, a greater sense of self resilience. So, we do look at traditional text primary sources for sure as a major component of these courses, but we don't seek to adopt
Mm-hmm.
the perspectives. We seek to learn about them and see how they inform those perspectives. But working within these public universities, especially, uh, we need to be careful, of course, that we're not actually promoting or indoctrinating students into these views, looking at them critically, and yet still trying to extract the benefit from them.
That's that's at least a big differentiator from like classic mindfulness practices where you just like strip all of this off and the information is mainly there in a reformulation, but not in the original content.
Mm.
So,
It is. I mean, we use those materials too, and we do read John Kabat-Zinn and others in terms of their modern formulations of mindfulness. But these two, of course, are not without an array of problems, not the least of which is that they may engage in some kind of code switching where the only thing really changed from the Buddhist view is the type of terminology that they're using to make it seem more secular. And I think that itself is a challenging question. I mean, what does it mean to secularize a practice? Is it something that we can really do? And moreover, is it something that students are even actually interested in? I don't think that students are really interested in a purely secular view, or at least a lot of them aren't. They're interested more in the non-denominational view. They want to bring in their own perspectives, their own beliefs, but learn to develop as human beings and flourish. And so, with that, I think if we just cut out all of these other perspectives, traditional views, discussion of what traditional objectives are within them, then we actually lose a lot from these practices. And moreover, a lot of richness for students just to contemplate and explore on their own path as human beings.
yeah, I mean, there are these different criticisms also that at a certain point you even cut down moral values or you cut down causality, which like when you have the aspect of working with the mind, causality, I mean, reproduction of thoughts and tendencies and so on, which ultimately lead to stress also. I mean, if basically even stress relief is your aim, then a certain understand of the working of mind and thoughts is not bad, you know, and And then you
That's
might draw into that this has been a topic long before, and that the idea of karma is not just an idea of like metaphysical rebirth and cycles and eons and of rebirth, and then also the enlightenment fact of coming into it, but there's also the matter of simple causality from one moment to another, and which explains also why a certain meditation is done when you have this background, and that this works together, and that this is not purely a nihilistic endeavor in cutting down thoughts in order to get rid of them and have an instant of relief.
yes. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't see any problem with teaching a foundational view of karma or causality. I mean, even in our experience, we can see that if you plant an orange seed, you shouldn't expect to get an apple tree. So, with that, students can relate to basic connections or correlation between causes and effects on what we would say a relative, conventional, mundane, maybe even secular level. And just as you were saying, without going into the metaphysics of rebirth and eons of karma and a striving towards total exhaustion, if that's the objective of our negative karma and so on. So I think that we can still work with the fundamental idea, and students can relate to that. And it doesn't necessarily make them Buddhist at all or anything like this, but just a basic idea of causality in terms of our experiences evident, and so not especially controversial.
Yeah. So, I mean, controversial, I think in Germany it might be more controversial because we are also looking for ways to introduce these topics in a way to maybe stir less controversy than we would. Um, but at the same time, it's also very enlightening to see the differences in the cultural spaces. Even though the US in certain ways, we all work together and like we meet each other on conferences and so, but at the same time, the cultural space is quite different, especially when it comes also to secularization and also to the understanding, I think, of the term of religion. And my impression is that in Germany, we do have a stronger idea of religions with the dominance of the Christian religions. Basically, even these ideas of world religions, and so this whole thing, okay, we do study Buddhism because it's what they do, and then we know what they do. But actually, now we do have people who want to study Buddhism because they are basically interested and open. I mean, we don't have so many students that have a purely Buddhist identity, but at the same time, I think people who choose this as a field of research, there's a strong interest in also getting to know different aspects other than a single text that you work on during your MA or PhD phase, where you just like dig into one or two, three, four, five texts and the rest doesn't exist. And so
Sure.
if this can then even further benefit other students as a contemplative program and help them to also have immediate benefits in their lives that are not soteriologically termed, like that would be even greater.
Whatever helps them, I think that's what comes down to it, and that's of course part of the basic Buddhist ethic, if we can call it that, is just, but also education more generally. I mean, we are trying to help our students get along and trying to help them develop and evolve as human beings. And I guess, maybe this part is more controversial, but are we just training them for a career while they go through college and university? Are really trying to help them develop as human beings? And with that, at least it's my view that instruction in the humanities and more humanistic inquiries is of great benefit and great richness, and a kind of rare opportunity, because once they enter the professional world, they'll have less time for those types of explorations, most of them anyway.
Definitely. And it's a certain commitment from students also to even drop into such a class. They could they could just get another certificate or another grade of anything business related or whatever. So I think if they drop into a class that you offer or that we hope to offer. It also shows an openness and a commitment to something else, to learning something more than just job related or career related topics.
This is true, and this is really the benefit of having a general education curriculum in the US anyway, is that students have to take a range of courses in different disciplines, different areas. And I have to say, the vast majority of my students, both here and in Virginia for that matter, were coming from outside and taking these courses just simply as gen ed requirements, but hopefully anyway, topics that they were interested in. It's an interesting question, though, as to whether or if in the future these types of gen ed requirements were dissolved, whether students would keep taking these types of courses. I think they get a lot out of them now, but would they take them if they weren't required to? That I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that's for us it's slightly different because they are free to choose and mainly they do this out of an interest. And to be honest, in Leipzig, many students come and take any kind of class, even just Buddhism related, um, because of interest, and very few of them actually are major students.
It is the same way here. Yeah, we have very few religion majors and Asian studies majors at this point.
And coming back to incorporating meditation into the curriculum. So people take time off, they sit in a classical posture, or this is free? Do they just
Within the class, when we teach meditation in the classroom,
Mhm.
yeah, so it really depends on the space. And I haven't gotten to offer this course at CU yet. But there is a space at the Renee Crown Wellness Institute that's set up with floor cushions. And so we could sit in traditional postures there. At UMW, we also had the Lydecker Center for Asian Studies, which was a space that only had floor seating, nice carpet, very comfortable, big windows. And so in both of those contexts, we had students sit in a traditional posture.
And then they do basically more an instantaneous practice, or like a shamatha practice, meaning calming the mind practice, breath focus, or um, what do you incorporate as a practice for them?
The way that I lay out the main curriculum is a progression of skills. And so, interestingly, in the scientific study of meditation, the measure of relaxation and concentration are done separately. But in traditional Buddhist context, if we're talking about shamatha or calm abiding, we're really working on both foundational concentration and relaxation together in one method. So typically within the class, I do a lot of guided meditations because they have to meditate outside the room every single day as well. So within 20-minute sessions in the classroom, I try to give them some tools to work with. First, beginning with basic calm abiding. So we could call that shamatha, simply focusing on the breath, and also working with some of these different traditional techniques, whether it's counting, or instructions to focus on specific points of sensation, like at the tip of the nose or the bridge of the nose. And then as we progress, we start to go into different areas. So we really focus on just this notion of relaxation and concentration and direct them to look at those qualities of their experience separately. They have to journal about their meditation each time that they do it. And so they can look for those further and really explore the quality of their experience as they're working with these techniques. And then as the semester progresses, we start to look at different types of skills. And so we do compassion type practices, working with that in a way that's a gentle approach. You know, some of the traditional models like Tonglen, sending and receiving, can actually be very overwhelming for students. And moreover, when we look at the history of that tradition, when it was brought to Tibet by Atisha, it was actually an esoteric practice. It was something that was kept close only for more verified and developed practitioners. And so I think we have to be careful with some of these compassion practices and really help students work their way up to um, working with more challenging people, more challenging experiences, certainly. And then finally, one of the last skills that we really work with is kind of a more open awareness and meditation and action. And so you might do more walking meditation and encourage them to apply this kind of awareness when they're doing different types of activities. At UMW, I was able to install a Japanese style garden that was fairly good size right outside the Center for Asian Studies. So I incorporated that into the curriculum where students would have to go and work in it each week. Didn't matter what they did, so long as they were focused for an hour and really applied themselves with a sense of presence, no devices, and no other distractions. So that's more of the approach that I take. And we openly have conversations about what secular and secularization might mean in these contexts. Moreover, what students bring to the course in their practice personally, what they're hoping to get out of it. I think all of these components are essential for success in it. One thing I would add, though, is that through hard learning, teaching this course over several years, one thing that I really learned to avoid was any type of deeper insight practice where, for example, you would explore where thoughts arise from, where they abide, and where they go. That can be very dangerous, incredibly destabilizing, even for students who have no other psychological issues or pathologies. But that type of inquiry, that one I think is very problematic, both practically for the ways in which it can lead to dissociative experiences, but also just in terms of this religious context, like the notion of selflessness, even if it's something that Buddhists don't find under analysis, is not a irreligious view. And so with that, I think we have to be very careful about how we explore that particular type of inquiry and the risks associated with inviting students to explore the nature of self and experience in that kind of way.
Yeah, it's also something that, I mean, by my experience in the Kagyu and Nyingma schools, that it's ideally done closely guided with like an intimate student-teacher exchange. And that's something you don't necessarily want at university. It's like
Not at
also
all.
you don't want to cross those boundaries. You don't want to having students expose their inner world, or also for us, I think as teachers, not there's certain things one would share in other environments, but that's maybe not the most proper one for it. And the
Mhm.
destabilizing effect, it actually also happens for Buddhist practitioners. I mean, it's not without challenge, and we have so many stories, old and current, of people who also failed at meeting this challenge and who left this path deeply troubled.
Mhm.
It's not an easy thing. It's not just something you do by the textbook and then you get out and you have your experience of non-self. There's many hurdles to pass and many obstacles to overcome, let's say.
There,
Or
there
discussing.
can be, but people can also get into these states for whatever reason. And again and again, like a lot of the new research these days, like that done at Brown University, is really uncovering the adverse responses to meditation and just the way of concentrating the mind, focusing on our internal content, which even if you're just doing shamatha and you're noticing a thought and saying thought and letting it go, you're still directing your mind to that. And you might notice the nature of those thoughts go further and so on. And moreover, a lot of this so called secular mindfulness literature also points towards selflessness as a fundamental quality. You won't find this core self that you're seeking. And that I think can have problematic consequences. Never mind the fact that I do think, once again, it's very representative of a Buddhist view.
Yeah, yeah. If you keep the insight aspect out of there, then I think you mainly look at for foundational doctrines, or when you work with Tibetan text in a seminary, most likely, I mean, the way I imagine it, it must be that you look at basic Buddhist principles, basic ideas, and um, see them as a background out of which these practices have evolved.
Within the context of the contemplative practice courses specifically, we don't get into Buddhist philosophy or many of its grounding principles. It's really more about looking at manuals of instruction for contemplative practice. So those are the things that we tend to look at. And then, of course, when those Buddhist views more directly inform the commentaries that we're reading, then, of course, we address them. But we might look at them that way, and it's really about trying to find instruction that is directed towards the development of that skill.
When you look at text also, they tend to be extremely normative. Like there's the
Sure.
ideal person and the person applies this and the given result is just like coming out, you take a wheel off a bicycle and it's off, and something like this, very practical and or very idealistic also. And of course, the practice traditions as such always have a current of orality, of actually working with the people that are there, with the ups and downs and with the imperfections, but they didn't make it into the text. And I think that's a big difference. If you read text, then it looks like the path goes like this and this, and it would take this and this time. And if you would have text of the Vajrayana tradition, then you almost have this promise: if you do this and that, then it will be done at the end of this life. But at the same time, you have actually living traditions. They do have a way of also dealing with the people that are present and adapting, also even adapting to different yanas, you could say, even though you're in the environment of the Vajrayana. Basically, there's still the liberty of putting somebody into the Hinayana or the Theravada.
Mm-hmm.
And but this is not communicated in the text as such, but it part of the oral transmission as far as I have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the faculty who teach these courses, it's essential, of course, to be a practitioner yourself and to have that type of practical experience. Likewise, something that I do in my courses for sure is I meet regularly with students. So there's regular check-ins to see how they're doing. And yeah, there's a real process of exchange there in terms of figuring out what's going to work with them. Moreover, this notion of, a kind of normative type of practitioner and the normative expectations for how it's going to go, whether, as you were saying, it really among our Buddhist communities in the West, or likewise in the classroom, people bring whatever they have to bring to the practice, of course. And these days, especially among college age students, there's really an epidemic of mental challenges, whether it's things emerging out of the pandemic in that context, but even before then, there's a lot to be worked with and a lot to be very careful about. Whether students have trauma histories, meditation in that respect can be helpful, but you have to be extra careful because, of course, meditation is not just a way of calming the mind, it's also a clarification. And so if those memories of one's trauma history become all the more vivid, which would be natural in many respects through regular practice, that's something we have to be very careful about. And I've also had students where they really suffered from anxiety, stress beyond even normal levels. And I even had a student who was prone to panic attacks, which he didn't share with me for maybe the first third of the semester. And then it turned out that finally, when we had the chance to speak, I mean, there were moments where he was practicing and he was actually like frozen in a panic attack, not knowing what to do, whether to get up and leave the class or walk out or whatever. And so we had to develop all these additional strategies around that. So it's true that in terms of working with these, they come with risks. There's a whole range of people who will approach them. They're all looking for help, but they do need to be helped in individual ways with hopefully informed and experienced guidance.
If you're in a university environment, it also comes with risks. There's the burnout coming. How many of our colleagues have had the burnout or are right in it or just on the edge? There's the worries about your existence, and there's the pressure of the deadlines and the grades. And sometimes there might be even a toxic work environment, which luckily I do not have, but I've seen. And all these challenges, just because you are not touching um, one sensitive spot, it doesn't mean that challenges are not present. And I remember one time I was teaching in prison meditation. I was invited by the psychologist there. And this was an anger management program. So you had people who were really tippy on, like, some of them had their sentences extended. And there was one guy, I think you can safely say his ADHD was through the roof. He was really, really on the tip of his toes and shaking all the time and looking right and left. And then we did a meditation, I think, for 5 minutes. And this guy, once we were over, he asked me, how long did it take? I said, 5 minutes. And he said, you know, this is like the most amazing thing in my life. I've never done nothing for 5 minutes. And it's only a short thing, but in a way it showed also this was like a very basic meditation, just breath control, nothing,
Mm-hmm.
no Buddhist topics with it, just very simple. And it showed also that even for some people, and I think one can surely say this person was heavily traumatized, that even such a short meditation instant can also have a very, very positive effect without any surrounding ideology. Very healing.
Sure.
Yeah, that was kind of something. If you go in there and you're all walled off, like the
Yes, I can't imagine going into that environment, but it has been shown to be very helpful. And of course, there's a lot of prison Dharma groups, prison meditation groups, and that documentary film, The Dhamma Brothers.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah. So it can be wonderfully helpful and really profound for people in that environment.
yeah. And in conjunction with this program, you only teach this program now, or you also teach classical Buddhist studies, Tibetan studies
Oh
aside?
yeah, I teach classical Buddhist studies and Tibetan studies, and that's really most of what I do in general. So I teach the Foundations of Buddhism course, Tibetan literature, really focusing on biographies,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm developing kind of a few other classes on Himalayan arts. I like to incorporate contemplative pedagogy into whatever I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. So even during these classes, you incorporate like beginning meditation or something?
Yeah, I mean, in all of my classes, including the large lectures, something that I do to begin and end the class is that I strike the bell. And so, right when class is going to begin, strike the bell and let it ring out. And at the very beginning of the semester, I just give them the most basic kind of invitation to stop everything when they've entered the room. They can drop everything that was occurring before, simply posture up, close their eyes if they're comfortable, and just take a few deep breaths. And using scientific language still, even a Foundations of Buddhism course is helpful. If you're doing this, simply stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, your body relaxes, and we can arrive and have this class together. And so likewise at the end, I'll make them pause before putting their stuff away and all of this and getting ready to leave. So the room goes silent and I strike the bell again, just as a way of kind of re entering the world and concluding our class. So, I mean, that's the most basic approach is that I just do that and students seem to really like it. Other elements are that in general, if I can avoid it, I don't allow devices, laptops,
Mm.
phones out at any time in my classrooms for note taking or anything else. unless they have accommodations. And so in that regard, it's something that I really like just because then they actually start talking to each other instead of staring at their
Yeah.
phone. Like they're in college. Like my view of college is that it should be a social experience. And one of the ways to do this is by connecting to people in your classes. But the devices have become such an easy way of avoidance that taking that away really brings them back into the room, into the space, and ideally with each other. So yeah, even in the courses that don't really have anything explicitly to do with meditation or contemplative practice, I will ring the bell at the beginning and end. And then likewise, in the Foundations of Buddhism class, they actually have contemplative exercises that they'll do guided either in their discussion sections, recitation sections, or as a homework assignment where they have to listen to a guided meditation, go through it, and then I have worksheets where they'll write down their responses as they move through the guided contemplation.
And if they do the regular meditation course, you said they also get a certificate at the end, and
What they're developing here is a contemplative studies certificate, which is basically there's majors, there's minors, and then there's certificate programs. And I believe that's the way it progresses in terms of the required credits. So if they complete the right amount of credits and whatever required courses there are, then they get a certificate in this discipline. So that's what they're building here now. It isn't live yet, but there's a lot of support and a lot of movement among the faculty to get it approved and on the books. I'm not sure quite when, but maybe by, another year or so or something.
it's really, really interesting what you're doing. It's really interesting. And to quite some extent, it actually what I'm aspiring to leading the center towards, and beyond giving this information to our listeners, to our audience, actually myself, I benefit a lot from hearing, yeah, what your experience is, what you have established, and what works, what doesn't work. And I think I can take this as an inspiration for our further directions in Leipzig. Really, thank you very much. This is
You're
really
welcome. Thank you for the invitation.